All right. Thank you, Assemblymember Addis. Great speech, great way to kick off this legislative panel. As was noted, my name is Brian White. I'm with KP Public Affairs. I'm a partner at the firm, and we represent your host for this conference today, Offshore Wind, California. And I have to say, over the last 3 years, I've been involved in just about every legislative piece of information and bills that my colleagues here have introduced, have been working on over the last 3 years. And so it's exciting to have this esteemed panel that you're going to get to hear today. I think this is the first time that Offshore Wind California has had a legislative panel at this conference, so you're in for a treat. And knowing that we are just before the lunch hour, you should all know you have now entered the legislative sausage making panel, just so you don't get confused. But in all seriousness, we are delighted to have our distinguished panel here. There's a lot of things happening in the legislature that you'll get to hear about. I will say that it is inspiring that over the last 3 years, and I think Assemblymember Don Addis mentioned this industry was really looked at as kind of a unicorn, at least in California. We know not in other states and other parts of the world. But it was after former Assemblymember David Chu, who sponsored AB 525, really got the legislature focused on this and the administration focused on this. So I just want to really kind of give a quick round of applause for Assemblymember David Chu for doing that for this industry. But there are more leaders in this space, and you're going to hear from them today. So you heard about last year's bill we did on AB 1373. Central procurement was important. There's still a lot more to do. And you're going to hear about ports funding, community benefits, workforce preparation. Oh, and against the backdrop, we have this thing called the state budget, which we know is a challenge, right? So we're going to figure out how to get through all that. The big question now is, how is the legislature working with the multiple regulatory agencies actually going to get these projects built with permitting challenges, transmission challenges, ports challenges, and supply chain challenges? Our panelists will get into that, and so what I want to do is to briefly allow them to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into it. So our first legislator is Senator John Laird from Santa Cruz, and I'll let him introduce himself. Thank you, Senator.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I was a keynoter last year. I have had elected office somewhere on the Central Coast since before many of you were born, and served as Secretary of Natural Resources for Jerry Brown and chaired the Ocean Protection Council for 8 years when we had the first workshop in 2011 on offshore wind. And I remember taking then Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom aside and talking to him about it. I now am in the Senate, and the 3 lease areas in Morro Bay are off my district, and I've been working on this assiduously, as we're all going to talk about.
Great, Senator. Senator Cottie, Petrie-Norris. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Brian, and hi, everybody. Good afternoon. It's such a pleasure. Good morning. Such a pleasure to be here with all of you. I am Assemblywoman Cottie Petrie-Norris, and I represent California's 73rd Assembly District, which is in Orange County, includes the cities of Tustin, Irvine, and Costa Mesa. I am also the chair of the Assembly's Committee on Utilities and Energy. And I think we all recognize that California has incredibly ambitious and incredibly important climate goals. I think we also recognize we have a monumental challenge before us to actually deliver on those goals. And I think we are all here because we recognize that offshore wind is an absolutely critical component of achieving those goals and building our clean energy future. We are all working on ways to accelerate the pace of that clean energy transition and ensure that we as California policymakers are sending the signals that you and your companies and your investors need to make investments in California and actually get steel in the ground so that we can turn our climate goals into reality. So looking forward to this conversation, and thanks so much for inviting me to join you today.
Thank you. Assembly Speaker Jim Wood. Speaker Pro Tem. I think I just gave you a raise.
Whatever. Yeah, the check, I'm waiting for the check. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name's Jim Wood. I represent the north coast of California, roughly 300 miles of California coastline. I have the largest district of any Democrat in the state. We're actually bigger than 4 or 5 states. It's a large landmass, and we're fortunate to have 2 call areas off the Humboldt coast and the potential for more in my assembly district. So I like my sausage hot and spicy as we're making it here. And I'm probably the one up here who has the least amount of filter. I'm in my last year in the legislature, so I'm not afraid to push on people. I have been pushing on people, and so I'm a thorn in some people's side. But it is out of a desire to see us reach our climate goals and to push our government to be helpful and help facilitate this, so that the companies that are going to bring us this resource have the opportunity to actually do it. So it's a great honor to be here, and thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Zbur.
I'm Rick Zbur. I represent the 51st Assembly District, which runs from roughly Griffith Park in the LA area. I go over the hill and I pick up Universal Studios in Universal City, and then I run west Hollywood, West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, and then out to Santa Monica. Prior to being here, I was the executive director of Equality California, which was the state's LGBTQ plus civil rights organization. And during that period of time, I also served for 7 years as president and chair of the board of what's now California Environmental Voters, which during the period that I was there, we really refocused our mission to focus on climate change. And so I'm involved. I'm one of the folks that is not as directly involved as Assemblymember Wood and Addis and others, because the ports and the infrastructure is not off of my district. But I am someone who, as I think we all do, believe that we're not going to meet our climate goals unless we're successful with offshore wind. It's just such a big component of our strategy that we need to really be very focused on making sure that we're making the right decisions to make it a reality, because it's really about our kids' futures and that component of our energy portfolio is a really crucial one if we're going to meet our very ambitious climate goals that we've set here in the state of California.
Great, thank you all. And just for the audience, you really can't ask for a better team of legislators up here today. This is, I would call the A-team. There's a lot of legislators, and a lot of policymakers and legislative staff who are working on these issues, and they're all supportive of what we're trying to do, but I mean, it's really a treat to have them. And so let's get into it. Let's go with the first question. So in 2022, we got the first lease sales in Humboldt and Morro Bay, and it was announced about a month ago that BOEM is looking at possibly giving some more lease sales in 2028. Generally, we would say that these announcements have been great, have been helping to solidify this industry. But is the public paying attention? Do they know about what's going on with this industry? And so I want to get from each of you your perspectives. And we know that there are competing priorities that the voters have, you know, homelessness and housing and wildfires and insurance. Oh, and energy affordability, by the way. So I want to get from your perspective, what are your constituents saying about this industry? And what should the industry and its allies be doing to better promote this industry for the public to understand? I'll start with you, Senator.
Yeah, I'll take a whack at that. And since Jim and I both have call areas off our district, we are experiencing that in particular. And I should say, in some ways, I heard about the previous panel where all the agencies were dubbing themselves as being somewhere in the marriage process. I don't know, I would have dubbed myself the stalker, as one of the agencies did.
Is that part of the marriage process?
It was in the previous panel, but I think we are in some ways the marriage counselors, and it answers your question, because we have to bring everything together in lots of ways. And if you stood back first on just the policy side, I feel like in some ways, and everybody's going to go into it in some level of detail, we've been playing whack-a-mole, where it's like, okay, if we don't have procurement, we can't move ahead. If we don't resolve the issue with the sanctuary, we can't move ahead. If we don't have some path for transmission, we can't move ahead. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have some mitigation for any potential wildlife impacts, then certain stakeholders are out. If we don't have some mitigation help for cities or local jurisdictions that might be impacted in some way. And so it is trying to bring that all together. And in that process, it doesn't necessarily happen in the sequence that best helps and brings along our stakeholders, our voters, as much as anything. And I did a town hall meeting that the local daily newspaper facilitated in Morro Bay last year. And it's fair to say it was rambunctious. And they were all concerned that a mega port was going to come in their estuary, which is not likely to happen. And they were very concerned about whether the sanctuary was going to be designated. And when some of us worked on the PG&E deal in 2022, we really limited it to a certain time so the transmission would be available. And for the locals, it could answer some of the questions about transmission. And so it's really difficult because I found at that very town hall meeting, nobody understood the process. I had to talk about what wind was. They were all concerned about the ports. Well, it starts with studies. It goes to the call areas. It comes with the lease. Then there's a commitment to procurement. Some people said, this has been going on for 8 years and we haven't had mitigations. Well, you don't have mitigations until there's a project. And so it is trying to educate and bring people along in the context of all that. And I think some of the lessees need to advance a little of the process, because if there's going to be jobs, it's good to highlight that in advance so it's clear. If there's going to be a process for mitigations and you really think that some of them are going to come, it's good to send that signal, and it can help us with dealing with the public.
Great. I'm going to ask the next leaseholder representative, Mr. Wood.
Great. Well, thank you. It's interesting. Humboldt County, there is a reason we refer to the Redwood Curtain. A lot of people move to Humboldt County to get away from a lot of things. And I think that what's happening in the community is really, the awareness in the community is about individual entities that have a stake in this and a piece of this. For example, the college, Cal Poly, Humboldt State has an interest in this because there's an opportunity to train workforce. Same with our College of the Redwoods. The environmental community has a stake in this because they have concerns about what this is going to mean for the port and resources offshore. Obviously, the tribes have a huge interest in this and a lot of skepticism about this because of their history in Humboldt County, being the victims of extractive industries over generations and being subject to a lot of other things that we could spend all day talking about here. And so the understanding in the community is really based on who you are and where you are in the community. The general public probably knows that we were talking about wind, but doesn't understand really much about it other than we're talking about it. So where I think the community is really unaware is the size and scope of what these windmills will look like, and that will probably open a lot of eyes once people begin to realize that. I do want to say that the two leaseholders off the Humboldt coast have really done a really great job in engaging the community, and I want to compliment them for that, especially with our tribal communities. They both established liaisons within the community, focusing on issues that will be challenging or of concern to the tribes, and they have really taken a really seriously the sort of the challenge of engaging local community. You know, Humboldt County itself is about 130,000 people, and Eureka is about 27,000 people. Arcata to the north is 16,000 people. These are small communities, and this is a big potential change in the community. And so that engagement early, I think, will pay huge dividends. But it's a process, and I want to compliment the leaseholders for their efforts here, and really taking it to heart. It's really important in the process, and so far, so good, I think.
Great. As the chair of the Utilities and Energy Committee, Member Petrie-Norris.
So I will say, I don't think that offshore wind is well understood by the public at all, whether you are in a community where there's likely to be a port, or in my case, in a community where there is not. I don't think people have the foggiest notion. And I actually want to, I think, even sort of narrow down the focus in terms of when you're thinking about stakeholder outreach and just talk about some of our colleagues, because I don't think offshore wind is particularly well understood by many of our colleagues, particularly when we talk about the scale of these projects, the just Herculean challenge that it's going to be to actually get this off the ground, get these ports redeveloped. And I know for me, I was fortunate enough, and Assemblymember Wood was part of this. We did a study tour over the spring recess and went up to Inverness and toured a couple of ports there. And that, for me, to see that, in real life, to stand under one of those turbines and understand just, A, what's required, but also to, I think, get excited about the possibilities for that kind of investment, development, that kind of manufacturing happening here in California, that was incredibly impactful. And so I don't think that I can overstate the importance of, at this phase for the industry in continuing to do those kinds of site visits, do that kind of outreach with more and more of our colleagues, because I think more and more folks need to understand, A, what a tremendous challenge this is, and B, what a tremendous and exciting opportunity this is.
Great. Assemblymember Zbur.
I agree with Assemblymember Petrie-Norris. I think the general public, doesn't really understand very much about offshore wind. I'm in a district that has a very strong environmental community, and those folks understand it, and obviously it tends to be pretty popular. Folks understand how important it is to meet our climate goals, but even folks in the environmental community, I would say, don't really understand how significant the challenges that are ahead of us are. Why it is that we need to be planning now, why it is that we need to be focusing on the financing of the port infrastructure now, why we need to start thinking about the transmission now. Our goal is to have 5 gigawatts in place by 2030, and now it's moving a little bit to 31 or 32. We have a lot of work to do between now and this becoming a reality. We're very good in California about setting ambitious goals, but our regulatory structure is one that is not designed for this kind of huge challenge that faces us ahead. And for those of us who are environmentalists, and I think all of us here are, the challenge is really making sure that we get started soon enough, because we do have to protect the resources in our communities, the scenic and environmental resources that are out there. We can't shortchange the environmental review of these projects. Those are really important criteria, and we need to have earn the public's confidence in them. And so doing that means that we've got to start taking the steps now to really move this ahead with urgency. And I just, I want to thank everyone that's on this panel. I've got to say, Assemblymember Wood and I have been beating the drums, and now having Assemblymember Petrie-Norris in her new role has been really a huge amount of energy added to sort of the coalition of us in the legislature that are really trying to, help the state develop a strategy to move this ahead. I will say that there is also in the environmental community nervousness, and that is not, that's well placed about what offshore wind really is. I had a group of folks in my district who are environmentalists who basically on social media last week just talked about how I wanted to put big turbines on the beach in Santa Monica, and of course had to explain to folks that these are going to be over 3 miles out. So we do have a lot of education to do, and it's and the concern doesn't just come from some of the districts that are really in the call areas.
And if I could just add one quick thing, what you hear from everybody's comments is that it breaks into different pieces, so we all have to educate our own colleagues who don't understand it. And then in the community, I should have mentioned that Assemblymember Addis, who just spoke, and I, together with Congress members Panetta and Carbajal, did a workshop where we had the lessees, we had the regulatory agencies, we had people from local government, we had an hour for public comment. And between the people that registered online and were there in person, we had 700 people. Because it's our job to explain to the people what this is, and it's not an easy thing. And the fact that that went 4 hours tells the level of complexity you were trying to get across to people.
Good. Thank you for mentioning that, and that's a good segue. So going forward, we have these big, audacious goals, not just offshore wind goals, but our climate goals as well. And other states are now looking at our climate goals. They're actually being even more ambitious than we are, some things. So it kind of begs the question, are we still the leader? What do you think we need to do? One, what do you think we're going to do to meet the timelines that we've established? And do we need to change anything, either legislatively or regulatorily, to meet those goals? I'll start with you, Assemblymember Petrie-Norris.
As you said, we have incredibly ambitious goals. And actually, I think we still have some of the most ambitious goals in the nation. But the reality is we're kind of getting our butt kicked by, I guess, right, Texas is right now the leader in terms of actually getting clean energy projects sited, built, and getting clean energy gigawatts on the grid. And I think that there are a number of things that we need to do better if we are actually going to deliver on our goals. And I do want to say, before I jump into that, I think it is important to acknowledge the success that we've had and the progress that we have made. So, for 57 of the last 65 days, we have run on entirely renewable energy for at least part of the day. And that is no small feat. And we are continuing our march until that is 100% of the hours of the day, and it's 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I think that when we look at what is needed in order to actually deliver, I think there's really 3 areas. Number one is I do think that we at this stage need what I would call a clean energy deployment plan. So I think that we've got our goals, and we've got projects on the ground. I don't think we have, as a state, done a good enough job of connecting all of those dots to understand, okay, if we want to achieve this goal, what do we really need to get online, in the ground, month by month over the course of the next 10 years? So I think that's a really important missing piece. The second, and I think this will come as no surprise to everyone in this room, we need to have some, I think, meaningful permitting and regulatory reform to provide certainty, not just to the folks in this room, but to all the players, whether you're talking about solar, whatever, onshore wind, hydro. Everyone that I talk to says we need permitting reform. We need to be able to move more quickly if we're actually going to deliver. And one thing I want to say is just sort of a, I guess, call out to the folks in this room. As you go down this path, and as you identify obstacles in permitting and working with our regulatory agencies, the more specific that you can be with us in terms of feedback, input, and suggestions, the more powerful that this relationship will be. Because I think too often I meet with stakeholders and they say, it takes too long to do things, everybody's moving too slow, and you say, okay, great, how can we help? What specifically can we change? And you get kind of a blank stare. And there's little that I can do with that. Because I really value these conversations, I value your input, because you're on the ground, you're doing the work each and every day. So we need you to come to us with specific recommendations so that we can actually move the ball forward. And then I think that the third piece, and I'm hearing this loud and clear from all of you, that will provide additional certainty, is that you need the market signals from the state of California in the form of our commitments as well as our financial commitments. So on the central procurement side, you need to believe that the state of California is really aiming for a 10 gig target, right? And I'm hearing that loud and clear. Equally, we recognize that the importance of a $1 billion investment in our port infrastructure is important, I think, both for the actual financial investment, but I think it has an outsized importance because of the message that that sends to your industry and the certainty it provides and the catalytic nature of both of those things.
Gotcha. Senator Laird.
Well, let me go to your point, and it's hard to top that. Let me go to your point about goals, because there was a little slight edge in your comment about goals.
You got that, huh?
Yeah. Well, I always try to not acknowledge it's a really hard one, because then I can negotiate. But the thing about it is let's talk about that for a second, because I was a mayor in 1988 when the state adopted the goals that we would divert 50% from our landfills, and I thought at the time, oh, nice try, that'll never happen. And then we got to diverting 60% and moved the goal up to 75. Mm-hmm. And then I was in the Assembly and was an early co-author of AB 32 when our national administration wouldn't adopt the Kyoto protocols, that we go back to the emissions of 1990 by 2020. We're going to put it on California. And we did. And the argument on the floor in the Assembly, when I was in the Assembly, was, oh, there's no plan. You're not going to get there. We adopted the goal, and we met it a few years early. And then when I was in the Brown administration, right at the beginning, Jerry Brown did we'll have whatever it was, 33% renewable energy in our electricity portfolio by 2020. And we met that early. And each time we did a goal, it forced the discussion that you just heard from the chair on what we have to do to get there, and people were thinking about it in ways that they were not thinking about it before we set those goals. And so all those issues, whether it's the ports or the mitigations or the procurement for a market signal or all those things, are things we have to do, but they are forced by the discussions of the goals and the fact that we have something we have to get to. And it seems like we're always panicked about the fact that we're not going to meet the goals. And yes, it was the low-hanging fruit, some of these early goals, but we have met them. And I think it is forcing the discussion that we're having right now about it all.
Good point. Senator Zbur.
So, I think one of the things that I've been concerned about is we've got these goals, and when you actually start working back from the goal, and you look at the typical timelines that it takes for us to accomplish things in the state of California, we are not going to meet them. So I agree with the Assemblywoman that we actually do need to think about about some amount of reform, but we have to do that also in a way where the environmental, and I don't think she disagrees with this, that the environmental standards that we're holding us up to are the highest ones, that we have public participation that is robust, and that we have very strong and good processes. And I think we can do all of those things. I remember meeting with some of my friends in the environmental community, and basically when I told them that I didn't think that we were going to meet these standards, they basically asked me why, and I said, well, we actually have a very good entitlement system in California when you want to slow things down and make sure you're getting it absolutely right. But when you have a goal that's an environmental goal that you want to sort of meet by a certain date, all those things that result in crossing all the I's and dotting all the T's by having numerous entitlement agencies that are responsible for pieces of a project. Most other states don't do it that way. That's the way we do it here in California. So, Assemblymember Garcia had a bill last couple weeks ago, I think it was 3238, which I know Assemblymember Petrie-Norris worked on, that is actually taking some of the first steps to think about how we would sort of consolidate some of the environmental review for at least the transmission and a lot of the infrastructure. I think we need to continue moving forward on those things. And then for me, I'm sort of looking at, okay, what is the first thing that has to happen that we don't have as much time on? The transmission, we have to start planning now, but the transmission doesn't have to be there until these things are sort of online. So it gives us a little more time with that. But the ports, that's something that's urgent. We need to get through the entitlement of the ports. That on itself, given the massive nature and the number of ports we're talking about, the 6 years we have to get offshore wind online is the typical amount of time it would take us to get the ports entitled, and we've got to get the ports entitled and built before we can start the assembly. So I know, at least those of us on the assembly side, we've all been advocating for a climate bond that would include $1 billion to sort of show the state's commitment to offshore wind and hopefully facilitate bringing in more money from the federal government and generating the private investment that we're going to need for the $12 billion to upgrade all of our ports. And so I would sort of say, in addition to what Assemblymember Petrie-Norris has said, that we really need to focus on the ports, and we need to focus on the ports this year, because every year we don't is another year that we're actually going to miss that 2030, we're going to delay that 2030 goal.
Zimmer Wood.
Yeah, everything just takes too damn long. And it's, I guess, and I don't say that lightly, I appreciate our agencies that are all working diligently on the things in front of them, but they're siloed. And so what I don't want to see happen is that we start working on this sequentially. You go from point A to point B. We should be working on the ports and transmission now, simultaneously. Yeah. All of these things need to be happening simultaneously. And I am concerned about, I think in particular, transmission. I went to COP. All I heard at COP was there's no transition without transmission, right? At the UK, when we were there last month, they're struggling to have the transmission completed. So the transmission is really, really critical piece of it. And depending on the numbers you believe, it's anywhere from 7 to 12 years and for the entire process. And if that's truly the case, which it certainly feels like, then our 2030 goals are just blown out of the water. And so could somebody realistically say, hey, we're not going to meet those goals, and just be honest with everybody? Or can we show some urgency? And I think what the role of the legislature is to push the agencies to show that urgency. Because left to their own devices, they are not going to show that urgency. They're too cautious, and they're not going to get out ahead of their skis. And I'll go out on a limb here a little bit, because my sausage making days are coming to an end. But I feel like we really need a real quarterback to really coordinate all of this. I know the agencies are working together. There's an MOU between the CEC and the PUC and CAISO. They're all working together. But I would love to see somebody who can knock heads and tell people, you shall get these things done, and you shall get them done by this time period. We're not trying to cut corners. We just want to be more efficient in the way we do things. And efficiency in government is an oxymoron. Those words don't go together well, and it's frustrating from someone who's been in government for as long as I have, that we can't seem to get out of our own way sometimes. So I think there's concern. I think the industry needs some certainty. We had an oversight hearing last week. We talked about it actually devolved into a variety of discussions, but one of the things that came up was, there is some reluctance to commit to the transmission that's necessary for the long-term goals of the industry off the Humboldt coast. And when you're looking at talking about transmission from CAISO that's like 2 gigawatts, that doesn't feel like a lot of certainty to me for the industry. And I think there's a concern about overbuilding and a variety of things. So I asked the question, I said, so when was the last time we overbuilt transmission in California? The answer was the 1930s. And I'm like, considering the growing demand and the push towards electrification, why are we concerned about that now? We should be building as quickly and efficiently as possible. So I could go on and on here, and I don't want to because I know there's other questions, but I feel like we need more coordination, and we need that sense of urgency. And I think that's what the legislature potentially provides, is that timelines, you shall do this, you shall do this. We're also going to need the support of the administration to be able to push forward on that.
All great responses. That question just took care of 3 other questions I had, so I'm just going to throw those away. Let's talk about workforce development. Jobs, and that's a a drumbeat that we know is going to happen with this industry, but it needs to probably happen a little bit more. And I would like to get your opinions, because there's various studies about how many jobs it will create and so forth, but there is likely going to be a potential shortage of workers for all the things that need to be done infrastructure-wise. What can the legislature be doing, or can it be partnering with some of the unions, trades, to help make sure we have the workers that will actually meet the demands of this industry? I'll start with you, Senator Wood.
Yes. Well, first of all, we recognize that immediately, the incredible potential for jobs in the area, in an area that can sorely use them. So collaboration with College of the Redwoods, with Cal Poly, our operating, the building trades folks have been looking at the potential there as well. There is huge potential here, and I know there have been tours back east to New Bedford in particular by a variety of folks to see how things can come together. There are critical pieces from my perspective of the workforce. We want the workforce to be as much local people as possible for the long term. We want these to be generational potential for people to be able to work in high-paying, highly skilled jobs in their own communities, people that want to live there. I think one of the things that people in our communities fear is an influx of outsiders and not knowing what that potentially means for the community, because it changes the fabric of the community. But there are young people that are looking for good opportunities. We've been through a variety of things. It was timber, and maybe even mining for gold years and years before that. Timber industry that employed a lot of people. Everybody thought cannabis was going to save us from and that has flamed out, smoked out, whatever. It's still a gummy issue, but there is this desire and a need for good, solid local employment, and collaboration with everyone is really important. And the leaseholders in particular stepping forward to help us, and they understand that, they actually do, and I really appreciate them for that. So I think it's going to be a collaborative effort, but to focus on local work and local inclusive of the tribes. So I want to say one final thing here, which I think is really, really important. I think that certainly the leaseholders on the North Coast recognize this, I think, better than maybe our federal partners do, is that our tribal communities don't want to just be consulted. They want to be active, and I believe deserve to be active participants in the process from the beginning. They are sovereign governments, and they should be treated that way. And when you begin to understand that, you can make progress. And they have huge workforce challenges in their communities, and they could benefit tremendously from this. But thinking about them as just someone we need to talk to is a huge mistake, huge mistake. And that's why we have seen that, I think, the Yurok tribe coming out in opposition to that. I think into offshore wind, I think their resolution that they passed in April of this year was not so much directed at the state and our leaseholders, but it was more directed at our federal partners. That's my interpretation. Like I said, I'm at the end of my sausage-making career, so I'm probably insulting all sorts of people here, but I think it's a really critical piece that the tribes be treated as stakeholders, not just being consulted.
Senator Laird.
Let me talk about this for a moment, just at the high level and somewhat political level. There was a bill to set certain goals that we had on the Senate floor on the last day of session of 2022. That bill went down with just 14 yes votes short of the 21st. And all 14 of us that voted for it lost our 100% labor Fed record. It was a minor bone of contention because everybody that voted for it in the Assembly did not lose their 100%, but we did in the Senate. And so because that bill died, the Senate president appointed a climate group, working group of 12 senators, and we worked with 25 meetings, a lot of them stakeholders, had a 15-bill package, and High Road Jobs was at the big part of it so that we could try to bring our labor partners back into this discussion. And the narrative from the labor side is that we are phasing out oil and gas jobs across the state that are really good salaries and good benefits, and then we're phasing them to jobs that don't have that, or at least don't reach that standard. And so we had a high road jobs piece, and part of it got passed last year, but that's our challenge. And when we had that workshop in San Luis Obispo, one of the lessees was asked and thought, oh, there might only be 50 jobs for ports. And the head of the building trades ran over to me because he had had a heart attack and said, why? I have more people here at this hearing advocating for this than jobs that just got said would be created here in this process. And so it is as much a political thing about understanding how we go to our partners and say, there's jobs at the same level, that there really are jobs, and they hate it. We found in our focus groups in the climate working group that they hated the phrase just transition. I stopped doing it because they just hated it. It meant that somehow they were going to be pushed out of a place where they are that's good and pushed to a place where there's not good. And so we have that challenge at the higher level with everything we've been talking about here that we have to do because we want to make this happen. We want to have the gigawatts. We want to move from fossil fuels to this. But we have to make sure that our partners see themselves in this, and that is our challenge.
I know we're getting close to our time limit here, but I want to give a chance for Assemblymember Petrie-Norris to answer, and Assemblymember Zbur, so Petrie-Norris.
And I would just say, I think that there is an opportunity here for just an incredible win-win. Win-win with the win, working on the slogan. Because I think we recognize this is not just energy policy, like this is industrial policy. And as you said, if we do this right, we are going to create great paying jobs in communities who have not had that for decades. I was actually just in a roundtable conversation earlier this morning with a number of your leaders and CEOs and Senator McGuire. And he said that taken together, the investment in Cal Poly Humboldt, along with the $435 million that the feds have already committed to the port, represents the largest state investment in that region, except for a prison, or not in that region, in rural California in 50 years. So the state of California has been investing in rural California by building prisons. Now we have an opportunity to build the next generation of great jobs for the state. So I think it's incredibly exciting. But to Senator Laird's point, we've got to make sure we bring people along and make sure that they recognize that opportunity and so are part of that solution. And I do think that there are opportunities for us to be a lot more intentional as we're thinking about workforce development. And another example from the UK, they have created, not for offshore wind, but for small modular nuclear, they have a $1 billion small modular nuclear workforce development fund that they have established. Wow. And the reality is, in order for us to do the big things that we need to do here, we need to make some big investments and actually train the workforce to do it.
Great. Zbur.
I know we don't have too much time. I think one of the most exciting things about offshore wind is really the potential to bring more than tens of thousands of jobs to the state of California if we do this the right way. The bill that was passed last year, AB3, requires the CEC, they're in the process now of doing a cost-benefit analysis of imposing in-state assembly and manufacturing content requirements on offshore wind at a 50% and a 65% level, and looking at what the costs and the benefits of doing that are. I'm pretty optimistic that what that's going to show, and when you think about the fact that just the improvements of the ports are $12 billion, that the number of jobs that are going to occur as a result of this industry are going to be enormous. And if we can make sure that we're actually lifting up all communities, that we're basically having parts of the state that have not shared in the economic growth of the state, participate, that we're lifting up low-income and vulnerable communities across the state. I think this can be, I mean, I lived in California, you know, at the tail end of the aerospace boom and looking at that industry that really left the state largely in the 1980s and 1990s. And this is something that I think presents both an incredible opportunity and I think as Senator Laird was saying, it allows us to sort of bring labor and the environmental community and the business community together with shared goals where they're all aligned. This is one of the few things that we're all aligned on. I think, you know, they're the kind of jobs that allow us to move away from our fossil fuel economy into comparable jobs. So I'm really excited about the job opportunities, and I think we need to capture them and we need to be planning for them.
Great. We are right in the way of lunch. I know this has been a riveting discussion, a lot of legislative sausage. I know you guys want to eat some real food. So let's get you to lunch. One rapid fire question. Chances of a climate bond passing, real quick.
Better than even.
Yeah, I'll go 60%.
Oh, okay.
I'll go 60%.
Agree. Same.
All right. Well, there you go. All right, let's give this group a round of applause. Thank you.